Hello everyone, Steve Crosby here. Thanks for joining us again in this effort where we are talking about the issue of authority and submission in the church, particularly relating to those who have experienced spiritual abuse, which is unfortunately too common, and how to recover from said spiritual abuse. That's one major reason why we're doing this series. The second is I actually wanted to try to put the content of this book in video form. This should still be available on Amazon. I am hoping to have Volume 2, an edited and updated version of Volume 2, out on Amazon sometime in 2020. It's number one on my project list. One thing that you will not be hearing in this, sorry, I'm getting some prompts here on my computer that I don't want to deal with. In this session is on the issue of headship. We're going to be talking about a lot of topics, and I just had to make some editorial decisions about what to try to condense down into 6 one-hour sessions from this book, and that one didn't make the cut because we talk about it at length in our Marriage RX video series. So if you have any questions on the whole headship issue, it's available there in the Marriage RX video series at the SOAR LMS platform. All right, unfortunately, I've had many conversations recently with people who are eyeball deep in this topic in a negative way. For some of us, this may be very old news. Some of us my age and 10 years younger dealt with this stuff 20 years ago, and it's thankfully long distant in our past. But for many, this is a very current issue because it's just like a bad penny. It just won't go away. So we're going to talk about 6 different aspects on this whole issue of authority. We're going to talk about spiritual covering. We're going to talk about church government. But on this first episode, we are going to talk about the very basic issue of the matter of authority, or so-called having authority over someone or something. It's an abused concept that has caused and continues to cause a lot of human and relational trauma in the name of Jesus. We want to remember this is not about just Steve Crosby trying to be right about the Bible. The failure to correctly get a hold of these topics causes real human pain, and that is our motivation. Our heart breaks for those whose lives individually and their families and their local church life are being, my phrase is, gutted like fish on a dock in Baltimore by the folks that espouse this doctrine. And I'm going to name a couple right off the bat because you're going to hear them. This is not being critical. This is public because their works are in public print. John Bevere and unfortunately Watchman Nee, 2 of the proponents, the most foul proponents of the abuse of this doctrine that I've ever heard or seen, and you would probably recognize their names, and their books are used widely in various discipleship and maturity classes. And if you personally haven't been affected by this topic, bless you, you are lucky lady or gent. But I can assure you, sooner or later you're going to run into someone who is either in the middle of this issue or has come out and is trying to recover from a traumatic experience. We need a theology and practice that is faithful to the character and nature of God as revealed in Jesus, as well as the whole sweeping narrative of what Jesus has done to, here's the key phrase, to reorder the universe. We don't want to be proof texting from Moses and David and Solomon and here. We want a theology on this issue of authority that's consistent with what Jesus has done. Jesus sets the new benchmark for all things. Jesus is Lord. We are part of a kingdom, and that is inherently authoritative. Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father doing. That's inherently authoritative. Paul said, follow me as I follow the Lord. That is inherently authoritative. You can't have a statement like Jesus is Lord, which means governing authority and ruler, and not have the issue of authority right there on the precipice. But the issue isn't the reality of it, it's what kind of authority. How does authority work in the kingdom? How is it implemented? And what's the difference between something healthy and something abusive and occultic? There's good authority and bad authority. I've used this example before. Some of you have probably heard it. I recently had occasion to take a couple of trips in an airplane. I was glad that the captain had authority to fly the plane. His training, his skill, his education, his experience qualified him to have authority. I'm glad if I'm on a high-speed train going somewhere that the person driving that train has authority. There is a good authority, but we have to have, as followers of Jesus, a common understanding if we're going to go to a profitable future. The person who put up, or the government entity that put up a stop sign is inherently authoritative. It's not an option sign. Stop if you want to. Stop if you feel like it. The sign means stop because your life depends on it. So authority is woven into the fabric of our existence at a natural level. How does it work? What does it look like in the kingdom of Jesus? How is something that should be so basic and beneficial to our existence, how does it degenerate into wretched forms of abuse and control and manipulation? And I'm going to say a couple of other stronger words. Demeaning, humanly degrading doctrines supposedly from the Bible. It's quite an interesting little exercise how they get there. The Greek, little word study here. The Greek word, and we need to talk about it for a minute, for authority is exousia. It literally means it is lawful. Sometimes King James translates it as power. Sometimes it translates it as authority, and this is, as is often the case in so many situations, bad translations just serve to complicate and muddy up a matter. And it's unfortunate that the word is not consistently translated. Power in Greek, otherwise just naked, raw power, is a different word. And that's one of the first important things you need to get here. When somebody in your local church, your pastor, your leader, whoever, starts talking about authority, if he's interpreting it and applying it from the context of power, who has it and who doesn't, and implied in it is he, she, or they have the power and you don't. That is a most unfortunate understanding, and it's not accurate. The word for authority is exousia. And it means this in an expanded sense: to have leave or permission, the power of choice, the ability or capability. Somebody said it this way: exousia means the can do. Why in my pilot analogy is my pilot allowed to fly the plane? Why does the FAA allow him to fly the plane? Why do they give him the can do? Now watch this. Because that pilot is endowed with the training, skills, and ability and qualifications. He can fly a plane. Listen carefully. It doesn't mean he rules the plane in the sense of presiding over it as emperor. It means his skills have qualified him to operate. He has authority because he has the can do. And in the church, when people start talking about authority, and we're going to see this in a minute, you need to understand that exousia is about the can do in you. It's not about somebody else's right to rule you. It's about them having a grace to empower ability in you. Get this now. It's not about something to keep you down and suppressed. It's about someone, we're going to talk about how in a minute, who has a grace to activate or awaken the can-do ability in you. It can also have the connotation of the liberty as doing as one pleases, which developed over time into the thought or the ability or to have the strength to do what you're endowed to do. I don't teach Brother Lauren's animation class because I don't have the can-do to do it. He does. He has authority. I don't. Over time, this word exousia, unfortunately, in a church application, developed into the idea of the exercise of power and the exercise given to rulers. And we're going to see in just a minute how that works in the scriptures, and there's a very important distinction you need to get. So you see the naked definition, and over time it develops into this concept of power. And when you come, let me ask you this question. King James, a monarchical society. When they see the word exousia, and you're a King James translator, and you're being paid by the king, you've been hired by the king to provide the authoritative translation. How are you going to translate that word exousia? Is your bias going to be towards the empowerment of the people, or is your bias going to be towards the absolute authority of the king? Of course, and that's why it's translated that way. Here's another example. How many of you heard this verse? Just a rabbit trail nugget, very quick. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. People quote it all the time. The word is justice, not vengeance. But because you come from a monarchical society that the king has absolute retributive authority to punish offenders, they're going to translate the word justice as vengeance. I'm just using that as an example of how if you translate from a monarchical mindset, it's going to distort the scriptures. So let's take a look at the examples in scripture where exousia is used in that authority over power, ruler mentality. I'm going to take a look at all the passages very quickly. It is used of secular rulers, civil authorities, and Gentiles. Please note, and I'm going to tip you off where I'm going. What category is missing in that sentence? It's used of secular rulers, civil authorities, and Gentiles. What does it say about the ecclesia of the covenant people of God? There's the old Sly and the Family Stone, I think. What war? What good is it? Absolutely nothing. There's absolutely nothing about the church in that verse. There's a reason for that. It's spoken of Christ. Of course, He is Lord. He has governing, ruling authority. Please listen to me. You don't have it. I don't have it. Your pastor doesn't have it. The church board doesn't have it. The synod doesn't have it. Jesus has it. It's spoken of God. Makes sense. Not too revelatory there. Here's one that's unfortunate. The beast has it. Very interesting. The church is never mentioned as possessing this kind of authority governing itself, but the beast who governs over the other system has that kind of authority. The two witnesses in Revelation have that kind of authority. Watch this. When it is used in reference to Christ and the believer, it's authority over unclean spirits. Notice, never used in relationship to two believers relating to one another. Yes, the believers have this kind of authority over unclean spirits. It also is used in relationship to an individual's conscience. An individual has authority over her or his own conscience. It's used of Paul's authority to be married or not. And this is a pretty, and I'm doing it quickly, but it's a pretty exhaustive list of all the categorizations of where exousia is used in the Gospels and in the epistles. Have you noticed what's missing? What is conspicuously absent? There is never, in the entire body of New Testament Scripture, there is no reference to any church leader exercising authority over believers or believers exercising authority over one another. It simply is not in there. It cannot be found because it doesn't exist. This is one of my first major points. The idea that there are people in church life who have a God-given right to exercise authority over you does not exist with the word exousia. We're going to look at apparent exceptions in this session. We need to get that. So that means whatever authority looks like expressed in a local church family environment, it is not what Gentiles do. It is not what civil authorities do. It is not how we exercise authority over unclean spirits. It has to be something else. Well, what do you mean? Well then, how does this work? Every reference, every time the word exousia is used in the New Testament verb form, excuse me, it's active, not passive. Now, I'm going to go to the board here and try to show you something. The difference between active and passive. All right, this highly sophisticated drawing I suppose it would be nice if I put some arms on these folks. And since they're Christians, they're supposed to be happy, so I'll pretend that they are. That one's a little distorted. That's because he's been doing drugs on the side. All right. What's the difference between active and passive authority? Every reference in the New Testament to the use of exousia, and particularly where believers are concerned, is active, not passive. Now, what is passive? Passive means this, watch. The other person has authority. I am passive, and they exercise authority over me. That's a little bit of a light color. I'm going to go a little darker here. For instance, this person has the football. They throw it, I receive it. I am passive, they have the action. They are active. Grammatically, think of like prepositions. To me. I am the object of another person's action, or over, or from, where somebody is the object. That cannot be found anywhere in the New Testament. Well, Steve, what do you mean? Stick with me. This is the most amazing thing that's changed my life, and this has helped so many people. Active means, active exousia, active authority means this. Watch. I have the authority. Me. I have the can do. It's mine. And I can, watch this, from my volition, I can yield my authority to another for my benefit. Do you see the difference? This protects you from being abused and taken advantage of. Authority is mine. God has enabled me. God has gifted me. And through trusting, relationship, and love, and I'm going to say proven over time together, I can say this person is actually concerned about my welfare. And so my authority, my exousia, my can-do is like a precious commodity. It's something precious. I am the active one. Woohoo! See, the person with the so-called position is the passive one. I, through relationship, believe that person has my welfare in mind, and I can give them my exousia. And when I do, then they have authority. But they don't have authority over me. They have authority because I have given it to them. And here's the cool thing about it. Let's say this person goes cuckoo, goes off the rails. I can what? Take back my authority. Remember, who's active? I'm active. They don't have it unless I give it. Saints, if Christians would understand this and practice it, there would be a lot less abuse, damage, and harm. We all, God help us, should have someone, multiple people, who are looking out for my welfare, looking out for my benefit, in whom I can actually trust the sacred places of my soul. And I voluntarily, from my will, give them authority. Watch it now. Authority is something that is given or yielded. Whoops. It is in the church. We're talking the church. Remember all those other verses? We're talking the church. It is not something that is held and exercised over. The classic Pauline example. Paul talking to the Corinthians. He says, I may not be an apostle to others, but I am to you. What does that mean? Paul didn't blow into Corinth, announce himself as an apostle, and say, now, you all need to join my network and come under my covering. But through relationship with specifically the church in Corinth, his apostlness exercised itself in this kind of dynamic. How do we know it was this kind of dynamic? Because the church got rid of him eventually. He fell out, and they fell out with him. 2 Corinthians, and we know the end of his life, he's alone and in jail, and he says, all have forsaken me. That includes the Corinthian church. That is not absolute authority. You can't be de-apostolized if you have absolute authority. It's not possible. This is critical. Authority is something I possess and exercise. It is not something that is exercised over me. Now I can hear this coming up. Yeah, but what about? Yeah, well, yeah, but what about? So we're going to talk about the yeah, what abouts right now. Thought I was. There we go. Isn't a woman supposed to be under authority and covering? We could do a whole session on that. I'm going to simply take the short version. Even in that passage, the sense of the verb is active. She has authority over her own head. It's not about, I'm going to go back to that. It's not about somebody else exercising something over her. The context is she has authority over her own head. And it's all tied up in the issues of the sexuality associated with long hair. And he's saying, look, a woman can do, she has the power to appropriately manage her hair. That's all that's about. It's got nothing to do with a gender-based, dominance-based, eternal template of sexual gender relations. It's active. The woman is the one with authority, not the other person. It's critical, guys. The kind of nonsense that goes on in the church on some of these things. Well, what about the Old Testament scriptures? You know, all you ever talk about is the New Testament. What about the Jewish scriptures? There are Old and New Covenant distinctions, which I'm not going to go into. We have other resources on this page for you to do that. But Jesus is superior to Moses. Moses is at best a shadow, and John 1:18 says that they did not understand God correctly. Jesus comes to correct them. He that is in the bosom of the Father is the one who accurately reveals God. That's why in our authority doctrine, please listen to me. We do not teach authority from Old Testament proof texts. That's what John Bevere does. In his book, Undercover, and we're going to hit it again probably, not one New Testament reference to his doctrine of spiritual covering. Why? Because there aren't any. Old Testament stories. In Watchman Nee's book on authority, same thing. Story after story after story from the Old Covenant Jewish scriptures and some of his own cultural stories. Because it can't be justified from the scriptures associated with the new creation order. We are in the new creation order. There is a new governing authority. Yeshua, Jesus is Lord. Not Moses, not David. David is not our example. We don't teach the life of David. We teach Jesus, not David. David in type points to Jesus. So Saul and David is not an accurate model for New Testament doctrine on this issue. Here is, I am actually going to read some quotes because these come from scholars and they're so poignant and so basic and so right, they're worth being read out loud. Just so that you know, if this is the first time you've heard any of this, you say, well, who am I? Who's Steve Crosby? He's just some nut in Texas. And boy, Texas has a bin full of nuts, and he's just another one. We've been making the news for all the wrong reasons lately. So I'm going to read these. But exousia means authority, not subjection. We talk about that in the marriage seminar. When anyone is said to have authority, look it. It does not mean the person is set under someone. This is not just my opinion. William Ramsey poured scorn on the idea that the term can indicate a woman's suggestion, indicating this as a preposterous idea which a Greek scholar would laugh at anywhere except when it comes to New Testament studies. Bam! It's another example of the only place this kind of crazy is allowed is in the church, because there are patriarchal and dominating spirits and objectives where this stuff is tolerated. Any credible Greek scholar would laugh this stuff to scorn. But there are some of you, I think, who are probably going to watch this. You're in churches where this kind of stuff is being taught as fidelity to the scriptures. You, brother, sister, you're being violated. You're being abused. And you need to make some changes. Here's another one. For that they need authority, and he is saying that their head covering is their sign of authority, as M.D. Hooker says it, far from being a symbol of the woman's subjection to a man, therefore her head covering is what Paul calls it, authority in prayer and prophecy. She, like the man, is under the authority of God. It's an excerpt from a longer quote. The point being, remember I said who has authority? Jesus has authority, that kind. God has that kind of authority. Your pastor, your apostle, your bishop doesn't. And in the context of all those women's issues, it's not about keeping the woman under authority. It's about recognizing that just like a man, her authority is God. Two scholarly references. Yeah, but what about the sexual marriage relationship? Yes, it is indeed referred to. But even that is not something that somebody exercises over another, but something that both have to give away to each other for the other's benefits. Don't defraud one another. The context of 1 Corinthians 7 isn't about some sort of authority structure of who's the boss and who has to yield. That's the way the Gentiles do things. The exhortation of 1 Corinthians 7 is to say, don't withhold yourself. Let's go back to the board here, Mr. Producer, for a second. Instead of authority, let's say sexual relationships. Let's start over on this side. Sorry. I have sexual demands and you must yield to me. I actually had somebody tell me once that God gave him the gift of libido, and he actually used that language. He was just like David. David was promiscuous and so am I. And I'm not responsible that God's given me a high libido. I should have the right to have a lot of women. And he was a patriarchal male dominant sort of guy. 1 Corinthians 7 isn't, I have sexual desire that I then get to exercise over you. No. Watch this. We both have sexual desire and we voluntarily yield it to one another. Again, saints, I hope you're tracking with me. Where does the authority reside? It resides in me, and that makes 1 Corinthians 7 make perfect sense. Paul is saying, don't withhold that from one another. So that passage has nothing to do with any sort of authority over nonsense. What about the centurion? It was a pre-Pentecost, pre-New Creation order, a non-covenantal Gentile. I do not believe that is a pattern for all time. And what the centurion in the story acknowledged is Christ's delegated authority from the Father to do what the Father has commissioned him to do. It has, again, nothing to do with a proof text of how to order affairs in the church or our relationships one to another. The authority of the centurion says, look, I too am a man under authority. Right, in his world, who is the emperor? The emperor, Caesar. In our world, who's the Caesar? Jesus. That's the extent of it. He's acknowledging Jesus' authority, and this is not a proof text for church government. Excuse me for getting passionate, but guys, I deal with the people whose lives have been ruined by this stuff. Ruined! Children who grow up into God haters because they spent decades in these damaging environments. Marriages that have not been recovered. People who are not serving the Lord today. Humans are involved in this. A Gentile centurion's relationship to his emperor is not a one-to-one correlation to the church. He's acknowledging simply that Jesus is Lord of the other creation. And what did Jesus commend the centurion for? Wow. I've never seen such depth of understanding on principles of authority and submission. Wow, Mr. Centurion, you really get how the universe operates. Of course not. He commended the centurion on his faith. His faith that he could recognize it as Jesus as a one who had been sent from a higher authority. We're going to talk about higher authorities, a whole lesson on that topic. The whole issue of submission to authority as this commodity that the centurion is applauded about is not in the text. It was the centurion's faith. If there is any pattern at all in this verse, it's about faith, not submission to authority. Well, what about the next one? There are only 2 verses that I'm aware of, and if you find more, send me an email, that speak of a leader and his exousia over a congregation. And we're dealing with exceptions here. The context of 2 Corinthians 10:8, 2 Corinthians 13:10 is for edification, building up, not ruling over. Anytime Paul ever has an opportunity to wave the authority card, he never uses it. He says, I have authority. He does. God had given him authority. And I could use it heavy-handedly, but I don't. You see it particularly in Philemon, the letter of Philemon. We're not going to have time to do that, actually do a whole session on that letter alone. It's a great example on this topic. Paul in Philemon appeals to love, not authority. For love's sake. And Paul says, even though I could demand it of you, Philemon, for love's sake, I'm not going to do it. The tone is deferring and declining to exercise what had been given him. Remember, Paul has a can-do. What is Paul's can-do? He has received from the resurrected Lord apostleship. That's his can-do. He got it from God. And he's saying, I could do this lorded exercise over thing on you, and I could, because of my can-do, I could require that you bend your knee. He doesn't do it. And in 13:10, again, the context is for his building up of the saints, and he defers to use his exousia. It is simply this: if you do not give me your consent, I will not demand it from you. That is apostleship. That is what a New Testament order of authority looks like. This is why Paul declines to use what he rightfully possesses. Godly authority, this is a big one, listen, will never exist beyond the sphere of our love and our relationship. Back to the board, Mr. Producer. Change the metaphor just a little bit. Let's see if this one works. Yeah. All right, if that A represents the can-do, Paul's can-do, my can-do, your can-do, exousia. How far does it go? How far do the arrows of love and relationship extend? That's how far it goes. If love and relationship grows, it's possible that the sphere extends. If love and relationship grows, it's possible that the sphere extends. What is not possible is somebody coming in, now watch this, saints, got to get it. Oh, I'm an uber apostle. This one's too light. I'm a super apostle, and I carry my apostolicity everywhere I go. I come into, now watch this, your environment, Mr. Producer, watch this, and I demand that bandwidth of authority. That's illegitimate. Because this uber apostle has not built the infrastructure and the network of relationship and love. You can't just jump in to a deep level of authority because without any relationship. Otherwise, your authority is not positional and transferable. It's not a commodity that you transfer at will into any environment, because I've been called to be an apostle. And I'm just using apostle because that's biblical language. Bishop, pastor, teacher, overseer, district superintendent, archbishop, cardinal, whatever your brand is. That's not the point. I don't want to rehearse them every time. You know, I've got it, and I'm going to transfer it to you, even though none of these spheres of human dynamic exist. That is an illegitimate expression of authority. Yeah, but, oops, looks like I didn't do the clicks right on that slide. The very famous Hebrews 13:17. I'm going to wrap up the session. We're doing pretty good on time on this one. Submit to them who have the rule over you, for they are those who look out for your souls. First of all, it's another dreadful King James translation. Exousia is not used in this passage. It's hege omai, and it's the only occurrence in the New Testament. Stop here, just general Bible interpretation stuff. Watch this. One word, one time. And how many of you have sat in church meetings, and when this topic comes up, what verse do pastors and authority figures jump to? This one. Don't do any of the work on exousia like I've just done for you here. They're going to hit you with this one. That is horrible biblical exegesis. If I have 20 verses over here indicating something, and I have one verse over here that seems to indicate something else, this verse doesn't illumine those. This verse must be understood by the greater testimony. Doesn't mean we ignore this, but how we understand that singular verse has to be illumined by the greater testimony. First of all, it does not mean blindly yield to anything they say or do. It means to esteem heavily, hegomai, to regard highly, to consider seriously. Now, in each of these examples, again, who has the active role? You do. You are the one who's going to actively decide to esteem heavily. You are the one who's going to actively regard highly. You are the one who's going to consider seriously. It's incumbent upon you. This verse is not used, again, for somebody who has some commodity of authority that they're exercising over you. It is an admonition to seriously consider. Consider. And the presupposition is that they're actually people that care for you. In many churches, your pastor doesn't care for you. He's a professional lecturer and a professional theologian. You've never had lunch with him. You've never had dinner with him. You've never been in his home. All you do is go to listen to him lecture every Sunday. That man does not care for you. And because he doesn't even know your name, doesn't know your pain, doesn't know your children's names, this verse does not apply. Secondly, and I do a whole full session on this and don't have time to do it today. The context in the book of Hebrews is apostasy. Please listen carefully. It is abuse to take the scripture out of context and apply it for something it was never intended to mean. Short version of a whole seminar on the letter to the Hebrews. Jewish Christians for whom their end-time theology was not panning out the way they thought it would were considering going back to Judaism because the Jesus trip hadn't worked out for them. That is the context of Hebrews 13. Saints, that is not normal local church life context. It doesn't apply. It applies in an atmosphere of wretched apostasy. And the implication is, you're going to renounce the faith, you're going to go back to Judaism, and you have a leadership team who's entreating you not to do that, and the exhortation from the apostle is, would you please consider what they're saying, they care about you. Mr. Producer, how that gets turned into the governing principle of local church life is one of the most creative exegetical gymnastics in the world. It doesn't mean that. Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say you were putting up some 2x4 studs in a wall and you're driving nails. Stay with me on this. And somebody brought in a jackhammer and walked up to the studs and started to drive the nails with the jackhammer. Would you think there's anything wrong with that? Yeah. Thank you. Of course there is. Why? Because it's not designed for that. The jackhammer is designed for busting up concrete, not driving nails. And it's the same thing with this verse. This verse has nothing to do with the normal affairs of interpersonal or leadership and saint relationships. It's about a church in crisis and an apostolic plea to please not go there. All right, summing up. Oh, just a little bit long, not bad. Let's summarize it and get out of this session. Exousia, authority, is something an individual possesses. It's not something someone exercises over another person. It's like honor. I can give it or I can withhold it. It is the power or ability to give it or hold it is mine. Others cannot take it from me, and they cannot demand it of me because of their rank or position in an organization. If I give it to someone, then, if you want to use loose language, they have authority, quote unquote, over me. Even though I don't like the language, you'll see why in some other lessons. If I withhold it, they do not have it. Even though they're a water-walking apostle, if I don't give them authority, they don't have it. To have authority over is never used in the New Testament to describe relationships between believers or believers and their leaders in a passive way. The concept of one believer exercising authority over another leader or a leader exercising exousia over another is alien to the New Testament. We are called to serve one another in love, not rule over one another in authority. Coercive authority, force, or power is never Jesus' kingdom appropriate. If that impulse is present, that impulse to use naked power, it begs a deeper question. Why is your mutual trust and honor not working? It's not, you don't need to do a teaching on authority and submission. You need to do a teaching on love and why it isn't working. Jesus achieved his lordship, his right to rule, because he embraced death and resurrection. He did not have it because of his position or his office as the Son. Because he tasted death for every human being, he was given the exalted name. He laid aside all that, I call it pulling the rank card, the master card of rank. He never pulled it. The sphere of my authority is defined relationally in proportion to how much death and resurrection I may be experiencing on behalf of another individual. It's not because of my charismatic endowment nor my position in the church. Godly authority is always 100% cruciform, cross-like in expression. It's a kind of authority that doesn't look like it has it, but it does. It's an authority that does not require or demand recognition, but it is freely, lovingly, honorably acknowledged by others. It's an authority that exists and expresses itself in weakness, not power. It is an authority that's willing to appear to suffer loss. It's an authority that expresses itself in genuine servanthood, not the exercise of rank, privilege, or position. Your favorite TV celebrity pastor who's never had a conversation with you has no authority over you. Exousia that is godly in nature must have some key qualities. We got one more slide. Exousia must bring a life, not just order. It must be empowering, that is, helping you to realize your can-do. Its purpose is to more effectively manifest the kingdom. It must be characterized by self-giving, radically forgiving, co-suffering love. I stole that from Brad Jersick. Brad, there's a tip of the hat for you. And it must be cruciform. Positional authority is a poor man's counterfeit of what we use to keep the show in order. Positional authority is what's necessary in the absence of love, relationship, and a healthy resurrection dynamic of mutual submission to keep everything from falling apart. It's like having a professional policeman make sure everybody stays in their zone. Authority cannot be defined by the value systems and the powers of this present age. Jesus' version. The Gentiles operate that way. Don't you do it. Any expression of authority that is based on power, force, coercion, demand must be resolutely rejected because it belongs to the spirit of the age. Dear ones, if you are in a church or some atmosphere where somebody is teaching this stuff to you and the flavor of it, the smell of it, it has the texture of power, force, coercion. It is of another spirit, the spirit of the age. It is not the spirit of Jesus. It doesn't matter how many proof texts they have. It doesn't matter how much Bible stuff they have. And it doesn't matter if they've sold 1 million books. It doesn't matter. It is not the spirit of the new age. So, with that fairly detailed first whack at defining the term authority, we're going to go on to some other lessons. Hope to see you in 2 to 6. Thanks for joining us.